William Henry Harrison was a frontier soldier and political leader who became the 9th President of the United States, only to die after the shortest term in presidential history. William Henry Harrison, the 9th United States President, was born in Charles City County, Virginia on February 9, 1773. He came from one of the most distinguished families in Virginia. He was the son of Benjamin Harrison V, the signer of the Declaration of Independence. Harrison's upbringing was privileged. He received an excellent classical education at Hampden-Sydney College in Virginia. The young Harrison initially studied medicine in Philadelphia under the renowned Dr. Benjamin Rush, but when his father died in 1791, leaving him without financial support, the 18-year-old Harrison abandoned his medical studies and joined the United States Army, seeking adventure and opportunity on the American frontier. Harrison received his commission as an ensign in the 1st Infantry Regiment and was sent to the Northwest Territory, where he would spend the next decade of his life fighting Native Americans and building his military reputation. He served under General Anthony Wayne and participated in the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1790 for a decisive victory over a confederation of Native American tribes that opened up the Northwest Territory to American settlement. Harrison proved himself to be a capable and brave officer. He earned rapid promotions, and by 1797 he had risen to the rank of captain. But Harrison was ambitious, and he saw that his future lay not just in military service but in the political administration of the expanding Western territories. In 1798 Harrison resigned from the army to become Secretary of the Northwest Territory, and within a year he was elected as the territory's delegate to Congress. As a delegate, Harrison championed the interests of Western settlers. He successfully promoted legislation that made it easier for ordinary citizens to purchase public land by reducing the minimum acreage required and allowing payment in installments. This land policy helped accelerate westward expansion and made Harrison popular among frontier families who saw him as their advocate in the distant halls of government in the nation's capital. In 1800, when the Northwest Territory was divided, President John Adams appointed the 27-year-old Harrison as governor of the newly created Indiana Territory. Harrison would serve as territorial governor for 12 years, making him one of the longest-serving governors in American history. As governor, Harrison had enormous power and responsibility. He was the chief executive, the superintendent of Indian affairs, and the commander of the territorial militia. His primary mission was to obtain title to Native American lands and open them for white settlement, and in this task he was remarkably successful, negotiating treaty after treaty that transferred millions of acres from Native American tribes to the United States government. Harrison was a skilled negotiator, but his methods were often questionable. He used alcohol, bribes, threats, and manipulation to convince tribal leaders to sign away their ancestral lands. He exploited divisions among different tribes, and he made agreements with chiefs who did not necessarily have the authority to speak for their people. Between 1802 and 1809, Harrison negotiated at least 13 treaties that acquired vast territories in present-day Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The Native Americans received modest payments and annuities in exchange for land that would become some of the most valuable agricultural territory in North America. Many Native Americans felt cheated and resentful, and tensions between settlers and native peoples continued to escalate throughout Harrison's governorship. The most formidable opponent Harrison faced was Tecumseh, a Shawnee warrior and leader who sought to unite all the tribes of the Northwest and South into a great confederation that could resist American expansion. Tecumseh was a brilliant orator and military strategist. He traveled from tribe to tribe, urging Native Americans to reject the treaties that Harrison had negotiated and to stand together against the encroachment of white settlers. Tecumseh argued that the land belonged to all Native Americans collectively and that no individual chief had the right to sell tribal territory. He established a village called Prophetstown near the confluence of the Tippecanoe and Wabash rivers, where his brother Tenskwatawa, known as the Prophet, led a religious revival that rejected white culture and called for a return to traditional Native American ways. Harrison viewed Tecumseh's confederation as a grave threat to American interests, and he was determined to break it before it could grow too powerful. In 1811, while Tecumseh was away in the South recruiting additional tribes to his cause, Harrison marched an army of about 1,000 men toward Prophetstown. On November 7, 1811, Harrison's forces camped near the village, and before dawn the next morning, warriors led by Tenskwatawa launched a surprise attack on the American camp. The Battle of Tippecanoe was fierce and chaotic, fought in darkness and confusion. Harrison's men held their ground and eventually drove off the attackers, who retreated and abandoned Prophetstown. Harrison's troops burned the village and destroyed its supplies. The Battle of Tippecanoe was not a decisive military victory. The casualties were roughly equal on both sides, and Harrison's forces withdrew shortly after the engagement. But Harrison claimed a great triumph, and newspapers in the East celebrated him as the hero of Tippecanoe, the man who had defeated the Indian Confederation and made the frontier safe for settlement. The battle made Harrison a national figure and gave him the nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life. Old Tippecanoe became a symbol of frontier courage and military leadership, even though the battle had actually accomplished relatively little and had driven many Native Americans into alliance with the British as the War of 1812 approached. When war with Britain broke out in 1812, Harrison was commissioned as a brigadier general and given command of the Army of the Northwest. The early stages of the war went badly for the Americans. British and Native American forces captured Detroit and threatened to overrun the entire Northwest Territory. Harrison spent much of 1812 and 1813 building up his army and preparing for a campaign to retake Detroit and invade Canada. He was a careful and methodical commander. He understood the importance of logistics and supply lines, and he worked to ensure his troops were well equipped and well trained before launching major operations. In the fall of 1813, Harrison finally launched his offensive after American naval forces under Oliver Hazard Perry won control of Lake Erie. Harrison's army crossed into Canada in pursuit of the retreating British and their Native American allies. On October 5, 1813, Harrison's forces caught up with the British and Native Americans near the Thames River in Ontario. The Battle of the Thames was a complete American victory. The British forces were routed and Tecumseh was killed in the fighting. With Tecumseh's death, the Native American Confederation collapsed and the British threat to the Northwest Territory was eliminated. Harrison was hailed as a hero once again, and his military reputation was at its peak. After the War of 1812 ended, Harrison remained in the army briefly but resigned in 1814 and returned to his farm in North Bend, Ohio near Cincinnati. He had married Anna Tuthill Sims in 1795 and together they had 10 children. Harrison's farm was modest and he struggled financially despite his fame and military achievements. He was not a skilled farmer or businessman and he had trouble making ends meet. To supplement his income, Harrison accepted a series of government appointments. He served in the Ohio State Legislature. He was elected to the United States House of Representatives and later to the United States Senate. He also served briefly as the American Minister to Colombia in South America, but he clashed with President Andrew Jackson's administration and was recalled after less than a year. Harrison's political career was respectable but not distinguished. He was seen as a reliable and honorable public servant, but not as a particularly brilliant or innovative thinker. His politics were generally aligned with the Whig Party, which opposed Andrew Jackson, and the Democrats. The Whigs favored a strong national government support for internal improvements like roads and canals and a national bank. Harrison was not deeply ideological, but he was ambitious and he harbored dreams of higher office. By the late 1830s, the Whig Party was looking for a candidate who could defeat the Democrats and win the presidency, and they began to see Harrison as a potentially strong contender. In 1836, the Whigs ran several regional candidates for president, including Harrison, who carried several western states but lost to Democrat Martin Van Buren. The Whigs learned from this defeat, and in 1840 they united behind Harrison as their single candidate. The Whig campaign of 1840 was one of the most colorful and innovative in American political history. Rather than focusing on issues or policy, the Whigs built their campaign around Harrison's image as a frontier military hero. They portrayed him as a simple man of the people who lived in a log cabin and drank hard cider, even though Harrison actually came from an aristocratic Virginia family and lived in a substantial house. The campaign used songs, parades, rallies, and all manner of promotional materials to create enthusiasm for their candidate. The Whigs gave Harrison the campaign slogan "Tippecanoe and Tyler too," pairing him with vice presidential candidate John Tyler of Virginia. The slogan was catchy and memorable, and it reminded voters of Harrison's military exploits nearly 30 years earlier. The Democrats tried to attack Harrison by suggesting he was too old at age 67 and too feeble to be president, but the Whigs turned these attacks to their advantage by emphasizing Harrison's long record of service to his country. The Democrats also tried to focus on substantive issues, but the Whigs largely avoided detailed policy discussions and kept the campaign focused on personality and image. The strategy worked brilliantly. Harrison won a landslide victory in the Electoral College, defeating incumbent President Martin Van Buren, who was blamed for the economic depression that had begun in 1837. The Panic of 1837 and the subsequent hard times had made Van Buren deeply unpopular, and voters were ready for change. Harrison's victory marked the first time the Whig Party had won the presidency, and there was great excitement and anticipation about what his administration would accomplish. The Whigs controlled Congress as well, and they had ambitious plans for economic legislation, including the re-establishment of a national bank and higher tariffs to protect American industry. Harrison traveled to Washington for his inauguration in early 1841, and he was determined to prove that despite his age he was vigorous and capable. On March 4, 1841, Inauguration Day was cold and wet with freezing rain and strong winds. Harrison refused to wear a coat or hat. He wanted to demonstrate his hardiness and strength. He delivered the longest inaugural address in American history, speaking for nearly 2 hours in the harsh weather. The address was over 8,000 words and covered topics ranging from Roman history to the proper limits of executive power. Harrison wanted to show that he was learned and thoughtful, not just a military hero but a statesman with serious ideas about governance. But the lengthy outdoor speech in terrible weather may have been a fatal mistake. Within days of the inauguration, Harrison developed a cold that quickly worsened. His doctors diagnosed him with pneumonia, and he was confined to his bed in the White House. In the 19th century, before antibiotics, pneumonia was often fatal, especially in elderly patients. Harrison's condition deteriorated rapidly. He suffered from fever, chills, and difficulty breathing. His doctors tried various treatments, including bloodletting and opium, but nothing helped. Harrison became delirious and weak, and it was clear he was dying. On April 4, 1841, exactly 1 month after his inauguration, William Henry Harrison died. He had served as president for only 31 days, the shortest term of any American president. His death shocked the nation and created a constitutional crisis because it was unclear what should happen next. The Constitution stated that in case of the president's death, the vice president would assume the duties of the office, but it did not explicitly say whether the vice president would actually become president or would merely serve as acting president. John Tyler, Harrison's vice president, quickly asserted that he was now the president in his own right, not merely an acting president, and he took the full oath of office and moved into the White House. Tyler's decision to assume the full presidency set an important precedent that would be followed in all subsequent cases of presidential death or resignation. But Tyler's presidency was controversial and difficult. He had been chosen as Harrison's running mate primarily to balance the ticket and attract Southern votes, but his political views were quite different from those of most Whig leaders. Tyler vetoed much of the Whig legislative agenda, including bills to create a national bank, and he clashed repeatedly with Whig leaders in Congress. Eventually, the Whigs expelled Tyler from the party, and he became a president without a party, serving out Harrison's term in increasing isolation. Harrison's death meant that his presidency left almost no mark on American history. He served too briefly to accomplish anything significant or to shape the direction of the government. His main historical importance lies in the precedent set by his death regarding presidential succession and in the campaign techniques pioneered by the Whigs in 1840, which emphasized image and personality over substance and policy. The log cabin and hard cider campaign became a model for future political campaigns and demonstrated the power of popular enthusiasm and mass marketing in Democratic politics. Harrison was buried in North Bend, Ohio, at his family's property overlooking the Ohio River. His widow Anna received a pension from Congress, but she struggled financially for the rest of her life. One of Harrison's grandsons, Benjamin Harrison, would later become the 23rd President of the United States, serving from 1889 to 1893 and becoming the only grandson of a president to also hold the office. William Henry Harrison's legacy is thus somewhat paradoxical. He was a significant figure in the early history of the American frontier and a successful military commander who played an important role in wresting control of the Northwest Territory from Native Americans and the British, but his presidency was so brief that it barely registered in the historical record. Harrison's life embodied many of the contradictions and complexities of early American history. He came from Virginia aristocracy but made his career on the rough frontier. He fought to expand American territory and open it to settlement, but the methods he used to acquire Native American lands were often duplicitous and unjust. He benefited from the democratic expansion of voting rights and the growth of popular politics, but his most famous campaign was based more on manufactured image than on genuine discussion of issues. He was elected in a landslide to lead the nation but died before he could exercise any real leadership. In the end, William Henry Harrison remains a footnote in presidential history, remembered primarily for dying in office and for the catchy campaign slogan that helped elect him rather than for any lasting achievements or contributions to American government and society.